Dear God in heaven, I thank you for this wonderful opportunity to talk amongst people who can share and give hope, dear Lord. Our world needs a word of hope today. And I ask a blessing on them and their families and everything that we say and do in this show today. Thank you and bless Claudia. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, good morning and welcome to What's the Message? I can't believe we're all the way to episode 53. Can you believe it? And the other thing is I can't believe is that I'm flying solo today. Our girl, your girl, the professional woman that she is, Claudia Allen, is, as she has said on her own social media feed, she's on her bed of affliction. That's how an English major describes when they are sick. She's on her bed of affliction. We love you, Claudia. I hate the fact that she's not here today. So it's me and Robert. I don't know if James is there in the background. I didn't hear him this morning, but good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us. What a world we're living in. And yet again, we're seeing the same script, just different actors being played out this week with the shooting of young Daunte Wright. I keep messing up his name, so we'll just call him Wright. And his passing since Sunday has been so disturbing to see. And this is coming out at the same time when we are seeing the footage of a stop of a lieutenant by police in Virginia. These things are disturbing to the spirit. They're disturbing to communities, obviously. After 4 days, that city there in Minneapolis, I should say in Minnesota and Brooklyn Center, they've been going through it again. And yet as people try to express their frustration, their rage, just the idea that, you need to recognize that this thing impacts our community. It impacts us. And this is just the injustice of it all needs to stop. Like I said, different day, different people, but the same story. So here again to join us today, and this is a pretty fast-moving show today. I know if Claudia was here, we wouldn't be doing it that way, but I'm so grateful to welcome back our dear friend, Sergeant Don Jackson, also known as Diop Kamau. Let me just tell you just a word again about Diop Kamau. In 1994, Sergeant Don Jackson and his wife, actress Tyra Farrell, started policeabuse.com to provide a safe place for citizens to report complaints. And over 25 years, their website has processed more than 20,000 complaints for citizens free of charge. And through the website, Farrell and Jackson have pioneered hundreds of investigations, resulting in prosecutions of police officers, policy changes, and settlements for indigent victims. You understand that that means that he is taking on police cases for people who cannot pay and do not have a voice and getting justice for people. And so today, their work comprises a 600 video YouTube archive of investigations on behalf of police misconduct victims. And so you can see why we've asked him here for today. They have plenty of video and training materials, and he works with police even currently to try to root out some of these problems. In 1994, as a political statement, Jackson changed his name to Diop Kamau, which is why I call him Diop even now, loosely translated quiet soldier. To acknowledge his daughter's birth. His father, however, is deeply carried in his heart because his father was his father was a police officer for many years and the best cop that he had ever known. And he followed in his footsteps. And so he's going back and forth. I guess we'll let him explain that. But he's got degrees in criminal justice and he's returning to us today. Thanks a lot. Welcome again, Diop. It's so good to see you. We've been working together for several years. Message has had several articles about the work that you do. And I'm so glad that you're here again today. Talk to us. You're watching, you have to be looking at what's going on in the news lately with the Derek Chauvin trial and all that sort of thing. And so I guess my question is, after investigating for so many years and doing the work of investigating police abuse, what would you want to say on the stand as an expert witness in this Derek Chauvin trial? What would you want to bring to the table?
I would start with this example is not what 21st century policing is supposed to be. The police are presenting a product to the public that they really don't have on their shelves. When you talk to police officials, they tell you that things like this are an anomaly. They don't happen very often, that they train in another direction. Well, how can all that training and all that administrative supervision result in these repeated incidents of essentially the same thing? Someone of color being beaten, abused, or in some cases murdered without any evidence that they actually committed any serious crime. Now, if these were happening after a bank robbery, if these things were happening in a shootout, if these things were happening, if somebody was actually fleeing the police and pointing a gun back at an officer, then you could say that they had a reason for what they did. But when you start at somebody sitting on a man's neck with his knee, and I'm going to tell you something, that you mentioned my father in your very kind intro. One of the things I had never processed only until maybe the last year is that, and I'll just tell the story briefly for people who don't know it. My dad, just like this military veteran or officer, was one of them, to the extent that he had done all the things. He wasn't doing anything criminal. He had paid his taxes, did all his work. My dad went to the police academy, was one of the first African-American deputy sheriffs in Los Angeles County. And while driving to visit my older sister, who had just had twins, he was coming back home that night. It was late. Pomona Police Department had a call that there was a robbery, a drive-by shooting with a 25-year-old robbery suspect. They dragged my 65-year-old father out of the car, beat him. And the thing that I only got a hold of in the last few days is that my father says in several interviews, and again, I had not even thought about it, that they put their knee on the back of his neck and kept it on the back of his head. Now, what Chauvin did lasted 9 minutes, but these kinds of incidental abuses where you get beat up just because you got stopped, not because you did something, or you get this extrajudicial violence directed against you, what happens when all that goes down? The police departments say that we don't train this way, but why is it happening so frequently? I'm so sorry. Why is this happening? There is no real supervision. There is no real review. The cases that make it to court, how many Black people who don't get beat up just don't get a fair chance when they get stopped? Something gets made up. Something gets inserted in the record about them. They're facing greater charges than they really should have. These occurrences are national. They're not unique. It's pretty much in every city, big cities, small cities. And I'll tell you my answer to this in terms of my assessment of why it's happening is because it's based on the institution that this country was based on. Institutional racism is part of our fabric. It's woven into the police department. In fact, to some extent, the same kind of mob violence that we saw at the Capitol that has been visited on Black people so many times, in lynchings and other brutality. Yeah, the lynchings where they do it publicly and they hang you have gone away. But you only need a police officer who has that attitude, who gets you out of the car, and you're representing something to him. You represent the things that he fears. So when his abuse goes down and you have an all-white jury or a jury which is sympathetic to police officers, they've been getting away with this for years. The only thing that's new is these 2 prosecutions now where the officers are being charged with second-degree murder are only happening because of the public pressure that's being brought to bear by people right now who are risking their lives and risking their time and putting themselves on the line. Those protests are having a result. It's raising public consciousness, but the monster is still there. And another public protest isn't actually going to be the solution. The police are going to have to go further, and they're going to have to prosecute more of these cases to actually change the direction.
You know, when you say this, change the direction, it reminds me of the other headline that I saw, because we're tempted to think that it's just going to continue the same way. But the headline that I saw was about an officer from Buffalo, New York, Cariel Horn, I believe is her name, who attempted, just like, if we go back to George Floyd, she was an officer who was on a scene in 2008 when one of her colleagues was employing a chokehold on a maybe a suspected person, and she intervened and took him off of her, or took him off of that person. Well, she got fired. She lost her pension for so-called crossing the thin blue line. But now, after all these years, 15 years later or whatever, she's been reinstated with her pension, so she gets it back, and so that's a victory in a sense. But so I guess there is some hope. Do you find that there's some other things that are happening that we can look to as being impacted by these voices out here protesting?
Well, I think, first of all, what you said is a great story. That didn't happen 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first organizations I started was called Law Enforcement Officers for Justice. And it was a band of Black police officers like myself who were being subjected to termination, mostly because we said something. We saw something and we said something. And if they think that you have that attitude, that you're going to be reporting on white police officers abusing people, they will push you out. They will find a way to get you out of the organization. And I'll just to relate to that story, one of my first complaints as a police officer against another police officer, first you have to know that's unique, it doesn't happen that often, was when my lieutenant told me that Black women enjoyed being raped. He told me that while another officer was describing a sexual assault of a Black housewife who had been dragged into an alley and raped by 6 people. I'm getting report information because I was personally angered by it. I wanted to get back out on the field and find these guys. And my lieutenant is lingering in the hallway, laughing about it. And when he steps into the conversation, he's telling me that Black women enjoy being raped. So I asked him to make sure that's what he was telling me. And then I went in the locker room, and one of my buddies, this guy, Officer Hubbard, he says, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to report it." Don't do it. Don't do it. I wasn't raised to be a coward.
Yeah.
If you're that cowardly where you hear someone say something like that and you're only concerned about keeping your job, then there's something wrong with you. And my point in telling this story is that I filed the complaint, and yeah, they did come after me, but I had a couple of advantages. I was educated and I was prepared and I knew how to do my job. So it wasn't that easy to fire me. So if you speak out, you should expect that there will be retaliation. It's subtle. It may not come with something like they'll just find a way to put you in a position where they can fire you. But if you're conscious and you see these kind of events and you feel that they violate some sort of a policy, you have an obligation as a man, a woman, as a human being to say something, because that's how you get to Chauvin on the sidewalk with his knee on somebody's neck. How many people saw him do that before and didn't say anything? And I think this young woman who spoke out, yeah, she paid the price, and it was no guarantee she was going to get any money back, because I know officers who didn't get paid. They just got fired. Thank God for her. And I think that there is, again, this level of consciousness. People are now, touching the fire. They're not afraid to touch it. They know that that's what it's going to take. But I think that with all of us doing it together and more of these examples, and again, our white allies, our friends, because there are people in the white community who don't like this at all. But we also have these crazies who really are using the violence that the police can impose on us as a constant set level. They get satisfaction of knowing that we're taking that beating.
Yeah, taking it.
And we've got to isolate them.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're saying this. One thing that struck me early on in this trial for Derek Chauvin was that the witness who was taking the video, she felt she had a personal responsibility to say something, and she wished that she could do more, which was such a sad situation. She did so much. Without that video, where would we be right now? But so you bring up a couple of questions to me. you're trained an officer, you had 30 years experience or more investigating, and before that as an officer. And so you know how to do this. But for me, what am I doing? Two things. How do we intervene in the moment? And how can we intervene now as people who are lay people who are not involved? What would you recommend that we do?
Write a letter. It's as simple as that. If the most important thing that we're not doing that we need to be doing more frequently is making a public record, making a record of something. If you mail a letter to the mayor, if you mail a letter to the police chief, first of all, make sure you keep a copy of it. If you send it certified mail and it's serious, they will get it and you'll have that record. And you wouldn't believe how many cases they will go back. And because there's some written record of what actually happened, a contemporaneous record has enormous value when things are being investigated later. And I think the thing that we fail to do is we think, well, it won't matter, it won't count. But even if you did it anonymously, if you see the police abusing somebody and you don't even want to get involved, send a letter to the police chief. I make a record every time because I can go back to those records when they say it never happened. I can go back to those records and connect it to an event that's happening right now with the very same modus operandi where the person did almost exactly the same thing. So if you don't want to be involved, and even if you do, the most important thing you can do of consequence is not tell all your friends, not call everybody. And, and I think you should post it on social media if you're comfortable with that. But the police don't care if it's on social media and it's about them. Unless somebody calls them, they will stay away from it. You have to put it in their hands to make them responsible for it. So to hold police officers or any public official accountable, you have to make a written record, not calling up because they'll just say you never called. They'll delete the recording. If you send it haphazardly, it might wind up in the trash can. So if you're serious about something, send it with a tracking number. It's not that expensive, and send it to somebody. And I also have one other point my mother taught me. Start at the top. Don't call the cop on the desk and argue with him about what happened. You make sure you send it to the police chief or the mayor. And better yet, I got one more thing. Start showing up at your public hearings, your local city council meeting. And now a lot of them are on Zoom. You can just sign up and join in to make your voice heard. You have as much power as anybody else living in that city, whether they're rich or poor. So make the record, showing up at public meetings, and going to the top are the three most effective things you can do in this time frame right now without stepping in and filming and getting all up close. You can still make a difference if you walk away and say, this is what I saw.
One thing about you that I've always, and this is why we keep coming and meeting up in history, is because I will always remember the first time that I learned about you with that video that, like we always say, that before videos could go viral, that video of that officer in, was it Hawthorne?
It was Long Beach, California.
Long Beach, California, who pushed your head through that window. And you always say how you didn't get cut because you believe that God protected you in that moment. And I love how God has encircled you all these years. And I guess in that spirit, in that vein, talk to us about the fighting in God's armor right now. Do you sense that you're doing that? And how can we be conscious of that as we go forward on this kind of social justice front?
I'm just going to say this. I'm older now. I'm 63, and I'm not the same man exactly I was when I was 29. But the way I was raised had a huge impact on everything that's happened in my life. And going to church fellowship, my mom played the piano in the church. And the thing I will say about my mom that she taught me about prayer and meditation is that it's real. It has, if you really, do you have the confidence in what you say you believe in? So if I feel that I'm right, I am relatively fearless. You can't make me, I won't be afraid. I don't care what you say to me. I'm gonna do what I feel I have to do if I feel I'm right. And if you're harming someone, even more so. If I never liked bullies, that just wasn't, but when I went out and started going up against the cops, first of all, I knew I was equal to them. And that was something that helped me, feel that I didn't have to be afraid. But more importantly, I always knew there's a potential. And there's some things on the video when I got out of the car that I didn't see right at the time. The cop had his gun pointed at my stomach, or at least one of the officers had his gun pointed at me the whole time. I didn't even see it in the encounter. And when I hit that window, I didn't have a scratch. I didn't have a cut. That big, huge shard of glass dropped right on the back of my neck, and it would have hit right here in the back of my neck, except that cop's arm took the glass. He had to get stitches in his arm. He slammed my face into the hood of the car. He slammed my face into the back end of the car. He kicked me. I didn't even have a bruise when I got out of jail that night. I was in jail for they kept me there 6 extra hours for nothing. But the point is, when I went in, I had prayed. When I went in, I had meditated. When I went in, it was the way I had been living before that. It wasn't like this was something, when tragedy strikes, if you're prepared for it with that kind of constitution, it's not something you get overnight. But because I lived that way, I was ready for whatever they were going to do to me. And it just made me feel that, what can you really do to me if I'm right? Yes. So my life has been about not just talking the talk. The things I learned as a child, the things I learned in church, I valued, and I employed them when I decided to take on the police. And I just feel that if people practice what you say you believe, and you got to step out, you can't hide in the shadows and pretend that you're being effective. You're going to have confrontations. You're going to lose some things. Most of them are just going to be material. But if you're serious about the things that you care about, you have to step out on faith. And that's what I think what people really don't do enough. They talk a great game out on their couch, but when there's a situation that's right in front of them, they bow their eyes, they walk away. They don't want conflict. They don't want to annoy anyone. They don't want to be in trouble. As John Lewis says, good trouble is good trouble, man.
Good trouble is good trouble. Okay. And I was going to let you go after that because that's such a good word. I just want one thing though. You talked about, because you were prepared, you were going into this is an investigation. That's not the same for the Army lieutenant who is driving down the highway. That's not the same for this young man, the right guy who's driving down the street and they, supposedly stop him because he has expired tags. What is it? Is there anything, I should say, that could be done differently to protect them when you're in that situation? This officer, he's got the video going. His hands are outside the window. He's asking them questions. Every time he asks them questions, it just seems as though they get angrier and angrier. Is there anything?
Well, let's be honest. The police are not doing the things that they're doing because it's due to a lack of cooperation. And everyone is equally vulnerable who are people of color, because I've seen them do the same thing to women that they do to men. They'll beat pepper spray a woman the same way, or a child, doesn't matter. The advantage we have now that we didn't have is technology. That cell phone recording, that streaming video is taking the police departments apart. And right now, that is your best weapon. You have to document it from the beginning. I would tell people a couple of things, just a few pointers. If you think the police are following you, don't keep driving. You're giving them time to think, to work up their story. So when you think you're being followed, pull into the first lighted area where you see other people. That's my first point. Second point is have your turn. Don't be looking for your device. Have it right there in a place where you can find it. And the most important thing is people don't know this. Oh, I keep my registration in the glove box. That's the worst place to keep it. You keep your registration right in the visor above you so that even if you don't take it out, you can say my ID, my driver's license, my registration, and my insurance are right there. One more thing, videotape your own car a couple of times a week so you can show that everything works. And then second, don't give them an opportunity by driving with your tail lights out and other little things, the ticky-tack things. They want to talk to you. They want to pull you over. And sometimes you're giving them ways to do it. So those things all matter. And just one more thing. It's illegal in some states. Check your own local motor vehicle laws, because hanging
air freshener
or air freshener, those things. So all those little things add up. So I'm just saying, educate yourself before the traffic stop. use technology to protect yourself during the traffic stop, and make sure that whatever happens to you, write it down and get witnesses together and write down the facts immediately afterward, and then deliver it to somebody like me or an attorney.
Oh, yes, yes. Thank you so much. It's always great to see you.
Thank you.
Cannot wait to hear how you and Ms. Tyra are working in your community. We got to have you back on, and we will always have this partnership and relationship and friendship, because you bring so much to the table and you inspire us. Diop Kamau, everyone, the quiet soldier. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
As we say goodbye to Diop Kamau, our good friend, our longtime friend, we love to hear his insights, and his story never gets old to me, partially because that's what continues to happen in society. It's just an evergreen story, and God's grace and protection as he does the work of justice is, you know how that verse is, where the wrong thing abounds, grace much more abounds. In the face of everything that is going on, Diop Kamau continues to press forward and fearlessly. And so for me, that's a good word. But I want to shift now, because we're talking about this. We have to check it. You have to acknowledge that what's going on right now really does matter. It really does have an impact on our lives. It has an impact on what we do and how we talk with our children. It has an impact on how we view police. And truly, there is an element of grief that comes behind each one of these incidents. And so I've been blessed to have known our next guest, Ms. Vanessa Hannah Verrett, a speaker, trainer, author, grief coach. And she has this interesting statement I think is worth thinking about today. It is through my own personal journey that I have a heart for people who are grieving over loss in their life. Experience can be an excellent teacher if we let it be. Life has taught me to believe that resilience, the ability to navigate life's challenges and still retain your sanity, is a skill that can be learned with God's help. It is a requirement of a successful, happy life. I also believe in second chances. I'm grateful for mine because it led me to this ministry and to my loving, supportive husband, who is also my best friend. Oh my goodness. Vanessa is a long time, not only a friend and supporter and writer for Message. And I'm happy to have her on today because she has a powerful story and a new book just out, hot off the presses, out there recently. Her new book, Pursuing Hope, captures some of her insights as she's worked through her own personal grief. Is that right, Vanessa? Can we hear you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that is so true.
You've been through your journey as a person who's looked from the outside. It's hard to talk with you, but you can give me and everybody else a good word about, working with not only the grief that you have, but helping to support other people through their grief. But I would sure like for you to share a little bit about your story and your journey, because on your website, you talk about the smiling person, the laughing, the joking person. But sometimes sadness comes to us all. Tell us about your journey.
Oh my goodness. My journey has been a journey.
Yeah.
I've experienced several personal losses in my life that actually started with my oldest brother that passed away. Then it was my mom. Then 3 years later, my dad, my father-in-law, who was the rock of our family. Mm-hmm. Then my own husband, my late husband passed away, and just 3 years after him, my baby. And, out of all of the personal losses that I've experienced, not one of them, as important as they all were, prepared me for the loss of my child. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's, that is just a parent's nightmare.
Yeah.
A nightmare. And it was in a situation where my heart wasn't just broken, it was shattered into too many pieces to count. I mean, I could not envision restoration at that point.
Mhm.
So I definitely went through a dark period.
Mm.
But I am just so grateful that during this dark period, God allowed me to go through every one of the phases of grief. He allowed me to question, to be upset. And in his loving kindness, he was just so gentle through the Holy Spirit, and worked with me. He said, "Come, let us reason together." So I gave him the good, the bad, and the ugly. There was
Mhm.
no point in keeping it inside, because he already knew, and he wants us to communicate with him. So it was hard, but I'd like to be a person who can reach out to other parents, in particular, people in general, but I have a passion for parents who've lost children.
Mhm.
Um, to let them know that it is possible to go through that dark place and come out on the other side with your sanity and your relationship with God intact.
You talk about, well, first of all, I hate hearing how hard this has been, the hurt that you've gone through. And
Mm.
as you tell it, there's something in my heart that's pitter pattering.
Mm.
I think as a mother losing your child, and I know, I've seen some of this, not all of it, obviously, but you and I have talked.
Mhm.
What were those rays of light that penetrated the darkness for you? What actually helped pull you from that space?
Well, always prayer. There were times when I felt that God wasn't hearing me. I felt isolated. But guess what? I kept on talking. I kept communicating. So prayer, being surrounded by people who were positive, people who were supportive. I have one of my best friends, her name is also Vanessa.
Mm.
And she gave me this little book of just bite-sized pieces of scripture to read. Sometimes when we're experiencing trauma,
Mhm.
it's okay to just try to digest bite-sized pieces.
Mhm.
And that was a blessing. I also eventually went to a
Mhm.
grief support group, and that's been helpful also. Counseling was a blessing. I had never gone to counseling before, but I knew that this time, in addition to prayer, that I needed something different. I needed a different approach than the approaches that I used in the past with my other losses.
Mhm.
So music that's uplifting. There were certain songs that I couldn't listen to during the time when I was grieving. I enjoyed them at other times, but then it was too depressing. So music that's uplifting, scriptures that offer hope.
Mm.
All of those have been positive things that helped to bring me out, along with the gentleness of God's Holy Spirit.
Wow. It sounds so intimate and personal. And I guess part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you today was because you talk about those skills. You can use those skills. Is there anything else you want to say about those skills before I ask that question?
Well, as far as those skills, it's important to remember the times that God has brought you through before.
Okay.
I am a person that enjoys journaling. So when we journal, I mean, especially when we're writing longhand, there are apps online, but something about writing in longhand makes us more mindful and thoughtful about what we're writing about. So journaling is one thing that I find that helps with resilience.
Okay.
Again, remembering the times when God has brought you through. He did it then, and he can do it again. So it's important. All of those help to build those faith muscles and those resilient muscles. And that's what we need to do.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say it's important to hold on to that faith. The scripture that says, faith is the substance of things hoped for.
Mhm.
Faith is that vehicle that drives us to hope, substance of things hoped for. And when we don't have hope, we just give up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Very
Do
important.
you have a sense of, okay, so you've had lots of loss. And sometimes when I see what's happening in the news, my heart goes out to people that, sometimes you just have to turn off the news because you are hurting for people.
Exactly.
And I'm wondering if any of what you are saying can be effective for a societal loss. What do you think about that?
Well, I think we definitely do experience that secondhand trauma, where it's not happening directly to us, but like you said, societal loss. And I believe these are things that can definitely be applied to loss across the board. Prayer is going to be key. Speaking with God, as if we're talking to our friend. You tell your friend, I've had a hard time today. I've been hit with this, that, and the other. I saw this and that. And, there's something comforting about having that personal conversation with God, knowing that he understands and that he cares. Again, comforting scriptures that can apply, that applies to loss across the board. And limiting, when we can, our direct contact with trauma. Like you said, turn off the TV, turn off the radio, shut down the what you're seeing online. And I say shut down, but have blocks of time where you're not being bombarded with that. Of course, we need to know what's going on in the world, but let's, limiting that can help us and across the board.
Well, I tell you, I'm going to ask you to hang on for a second because I want to bring in our next guest. And I've been doing it like this because our next guest, we reached out to the folks and I want to introduce you and you'll understand why, we're doing it like this. First of all, Lisa Connor, and I believe she's joined us now, and I'm not hoping that she'll be able to join us on camera soon. Oh, there she is. Let me introduce Pastor Lisa Connors is a licensed clinical professional counselor and licensed bachelor social worker in Maryland. She has a Bachelor of Social Work from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, a Master of Divinity from Howard University, and a Master of Arts in Professional Counseling from Liberty University. She's a national certified counselor, and at present, she's a doctoral candidate pursuing her PhD in psychology. Lisa has experience working with individuals, families, couples, and groups affected by violence, abuse, addictions, and other traumatic life experiences. Lisa's desire is to serve individuals who have experienced and are experiencing issues that affect their ability to live whole, completely and abundantly in Jesus Christ. She's married to her self-described soulmate, and they've got 4 adult children. Was that you laughing, Lisa?
It is.
She's got 4 adult children and some grandchildren in there as well. And the reason why we're talking to Lisa Connors today, I had a great opportunity to hear her in a session last year called "When You're Not Allowed to Grieve" and disenfranchised grief. And so I guess, to me, I'm seeing this, and I hope you all who are looking and watching, if you hit us up in the chat and everything like this, tell us what you think about this. But for me, I'm seeing these continual traumas that are happening with young Black people as an occasion to grieve. And when you talk about disenfranchised grief, now we got a whole nother, seems like another layer that complicates this issue. Not only are we're having a hard time making a difference and seeing these reforms happen in a way that's effective and fast enough, but now we got complicated grief. So can you give us in a few minutes, unpack what does it mean to have to be disenfranchised from grief? What does that mean?
So first of all, thank you, Carmela, for having me on, and you certainly
Thank
found my
you.
bio.
Thank
So thank you
you.
for that. Definitely, I want to say hi, Vanessa. I certainly am sorry for your loss. Definitely, thank you so much for sharing your story. So when I think about disenfranchised grief and the topic that I did for the state of Maryland, when it's not proper to grieve. So one of the questions I usually say is, who can hold that space for you? And so as a society, let's think about it. As a society, African Americans, and I'm just going to be real about it, when we were growing up, I grew up in the South, and a lot of us grew up in households where if something happened, you had to be strong. You couldn't cry. You couldn't weep. You couldn't wail. No, we don't do that. You gotta suck it up, get over it. And so what has happened is with disenfranchised grief, is that grief that's not socially validated. So when there are losses, particularly stigmatized loss, so I'll give you an example, homicide, or loss from overdose, or someone who has an abortion, or someone who has a miscarriage, even now during COVID, could be considered disenfranchised grief because it's not a loss that is socially validated and it's not publicly mourned. So say, for instance, if I go around saying, hey, I'm crying because as a result, my son died as a result of gun violence. Most people would say, well, what was he doing? Where was he at? So it's the stigma that's attached to it. And so people don't really talk about, or they don't seek out care and treatment because it's the shame sometimes and the embarrassment, that people feel. And it's the blame, because I've had clients and I've been in situations where people's loved one has taken their own life. And so they may not necessarily say that my loved one took his or her life, because it goes back to stigma, the stigma that is associated with what didn't you do? What did you do? What kind of mother was you? What kind of father was you? And so they put the blame on the individual. And so people don't come forth saying how they feel or what's going on with them for the fear of being stigmatized or for the fear of being criticized and judged. And so that prohibits people from seeking out care and treatment. That sometimes prohibits people from getting counseling. It's not just the fact that it's a stigmatized loss. It's also the fact that I got to be strong and I got to get back on the horse and I got to keep it moving. And so one of the things I say to clients, there's a difference between moving on and moving forward. Moving on is like skating. We glide through it and we go back to life as if it's quote unquote normal. But when we move forward, that means I'm taking every punch, I'm taking every hit, I'm taking the bumps and the bruises along the way, and I'm learning along my journey. So I don't tell people to move on. I tell them, how can we move forward? How can I be present with you? How can I hold this space for you? And so going back to your first question is, who holds the space? Who can hold the space when people are grieving? Most of the time people will say, I'll be there. Won't you call me? Won't you hit me up? Next thing you know, you calling them, they looking at their call ID. Man, there she go again, talking about the same thing. I don't really want to hear that. And so who holds the space? And that's what I try to do for all of my clients. I hold that space with them. And sometimes I have to hold it for them, if that makes sense. So if that answers, I hope that answers your question.
No, it absolutely does. I'm just looking at you. I'm like, it's just a wealth of knowledge, both of you ladies. You all are getting me today, and I think, okay, so, and I'm not asking for free counseling, although that's the way this is going to come across. Okay, what is going on today? What is happening that's out in the air? To me, I look at what is happening to these young men when they are being gunned down. When I'm looking at what's happening in these different communities where there's rage and frustration that is rightfully rooted, that looks to me like an expression of disenfranchised grief. Am I right?
It is. It is. Because the opposite, so in the counseling world, and we talk about this a lot, sometimes the opposite of anger and rage is what you see. The other side of that could be depression.
Okay.
Could be I'm having the blues, or I am depressed. But think about it. Go back historically.
Mhm.
Think about, and I'm just saying historically from my own family, nobody talked about the fact that we're depressed. Nobody talked about the fact that I'm experiencing anxiety. You know, nobody talks about the fact that I'm jumpy all the time. And every time I hear a boom, you know, I'm running under my covers or under the bed. Nobody talks about that. And so then if we're not talking about it, think about us as an adults. If
Mhm.
we're not talking about it, and if we're not saying it's okay, so I have to give you permission to
Yeah.
say it's okay to do that. I have to give you permission to say it's okay to grieve. It's okay to cry. It's okay to, like Vanessa was saying, it's okay to journal. It's okay to, you know, do spoken word or white poetry or, you know, or do drama. It's okay to do that. Because if that is the way that you need to express what it is you're holding on the inside, there is no outlet. They're
Mhm.
holding it in. So where do they put it? And this is not a clinical term, but
Mhm.
where do they dump it?
Yeah.
And they have nowhere to dump it. So they're holding it. And so when we know, when we hold things in, and I'll give you an example, think about a balloon.
Mhm.
When you keep putting air into a balloon, eventually what is going to happen to that balloon?
Mhm.
That Vanessa said it.
Mhm.
It's the same thing with people. If I keep dumping, if I keep dumping, if I keep dumping, I'm going to explode because the body can't hold all of the emotions and all of the things that it goes through. It can't hold it. We can't hold it. And it's not helpful and it's not healthy. So who holds the space?
Lisa, I was going to ask one other thing, but okay, suppose you are remote and you are not affected by this. And this scares me about myself sometimes. And I'm sorry for everybody who's looking at you, y'all are looking at me like I'm some kind of cold person.
No, I'm not.
I think that the thing is sometimes the stuff happens over and over and over again. And something in us blanks. It's just, okay, yet again, what do you know, I guess maybe I'm asking the opposite of sort of a grief approach. What would you say to people who have become numb to what has happened? And this is questions for both of you.
Well, I'm going to say it this way. And like I said, I'm just going to be honest. So I do a training on intergenerational trauma. And the reason why I do intergenerational trauma, because the things that are happening presently, we're impacted by the past. And so what we don't do, we don't talk about the past. We don't talk about those things that have happened in our families and with our ancestors. Because most of the time people say, I don't want to relive it. Don't talk about it. That was the past. I didn't even live back then. So why are you bringing it up? But I guarantee you, I can tell you this, being a clinician and I see clients, everything that has happened in the past is impacting the present.
Yeah.
And so what we have learned, this is learned. Just like we learn things, we can unlearn it. Just like we learn how to cut off our emotions, and just like our ancestors have learned how to cut off their emotion because they needed to cope. Say, for instance, with slavery. So fast forward to the present, I learned how to do it during slavery time. I learned how to cut off my emotions because I got to survive. I got to cope. I can't let these people know that it's getting me down. So fast forward to the present, that has been taught to future generations. So now we have a generation of knowing how to cope with stuff. We are emotionless. We shut down because that's what we have learned how to do. So one of the things that I try to encourage my clients to do, because a lot of my clients are experiencing this. I'm saying, so if you need to yell right now, I want you to do it now. I want you to do it in front of me because I'm here to hold this space and I'm here to keep you safe. And so I give my clients permission to do that right here and now, because people will say, I don't know how I feel. I don't even know what to say. I can't even really grasp what's going on with me. And so I try to help my clients bring it forth. It's there. They want to do it, but they just don't know how to do it because we've been taught and we've learned how to shut it off because we need to cope and we need to survive.
Yeah. Vanessa, you wanted to jump in on that one?
I just want to say, out of the many things that I do, one of the things is I work on a helpline. And there are people who call in who are feeling numb, and they they oftentimes just need someone to, in addition to, what Dr. Connors has just said, somebody to listen to them and be able to really hear them, even speak it like, I hear what you're saying. I hear you.
Mhm.
And to just listen without judgment, in order for those people to release how they're feeling, release their emotions, they need to feel that they're not being judged. So so that's, my take, one of my takes on that.
Ladies, I got one more question, and then Vanessa, I'm gonna come back to you because I want to talk about pursuing hope. One more question, and Lisa Connors, I'm so happy that you joined us today. I don't care what you say, this is you can be stuck with me. I hope you will come back many times.
Please invite me back, because as I said in the email, this is not one and done.
Yeah, no. Hey, you're gonna be, I hope not sorry that we will call you again. But ladies, help us help our community that's hurting right now in this kind of grief. What is it? We are where I am in Maryland, I'm kind of remote to what's happening in Minneapolis, but that's why we have a message, because we believe that what we put out there, I happen to have one thing right here, right now. We put out a lot of materials to give people hope and things like that, but help us as individuals sort of come alongside people who are grieving as a societal thing. It just sounds like this is personal grief compounded exponentially to infinity. You know what I mean? Help us help other people. What can we be doing?
Want me to go first or Vanessa? Which one?
It doesn't matter to me.
So I'll go. So one of the things that my godmother said to me when she was going through therapy, and then therapist said this to her, and I don't know the therapist's name, but when her husband died, she said to her, this was the quote she gave her: never let anyone deny you your reality.
Mm-hmm.
It is your reality. You're walking in the shoes. Allow yourself to go that way. Allow yourself to go down that path or that journey. Because the only way to get to the other side of the wilderness is to go through the wilderness.
Mm.
We skip steps, we skip things. And although, when we go through grief and loss, it's not stages, it's just our experience, but we skip those things. But in order to get to the other side, we got to go through. And so one of the things that I tell my clients, in order to heal, we must reveal. In order to heal, we must feel. And so it's very important to allow yourself to feel. And there are times when I have to give people permission to do that, because they don't know if they can. They have no one to validate that for them, that it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel the things that I'm feeling. And so that is one of the things that I really encourage my clients to do, is that share your story. It's okay to share your story. I'm here to listen. I'm going to be present with you. I'm going to sit with you. I'm going to, again, hold that space for you so that you can share your story. So at the end of all of this, when we think about resilience, the last thing I'm going to say is that forgiveness has to take place. Forgiveness of other people. But the important part of forgiveness is forgiveness of self. And that's one thing that many of us have a hard time doing. It's forgiving ourselves for the things that have happened. And that leads into self-compassion. How can you be gentle? How can you be kind? How can you be patient with yourself as you're taking this journey?
Wow. Vanessa.
In addition to what Dr. Connors just shared, those are very practical steps. And those are the ones that I share as well when coaching, whether it's one-on-one coaching or whether it's working on the helpline. In addition to that, I try to encourage people to hang on to hope. I like a quote by Desmond Tutu that says, hope is being able to see there is light despite all the darkness. And it's so important and so critical just to hold on to that. And I also like to share with people just to know what you know. Know that God is with you even when you can't feel him, even when you can't trace him. I went through periods I couldn't feel, I couldn't trace because of the pain. Pain oftentimes will hide God's presence. So it's important to be aware, not to stay in that mode. Keep hope alive. And I like to use the illustration that, you're outside, it's a beautiful sunny day. You walk inside your house, you go down into your basement, there are no windows. You can no longer see the sun, you can't feel the sun, but does that mean the sun is not there? The sun is still shining. The S-O-N, sun, Jesus Christ, is still shining. He is still with you. He's carrying you even when you can't feel it. Just hang on and hold on to that and keep hope alive in Jesus.
Wow. Well, nobody was ever going to confuse us today that we're saying that the only thing that we do is pray and read the Bible in the face of this oppression. We're saying you're praying, or what I'm hearing from you is that this is the only way you can face it. You got to, you do this, and it prepares you, as Diop said earlier, to be out there and fight another day.
Yeah, you have to pray and take the practical steps. Faith without works is dead.
Oh my goodness, you all really helped us out today. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate this. We'll be back. Tell us very quickly, Lisa, before we go, and Vanessa, I would love to know, do you have anything going on that we need to be a part of? Any sessions that are coming up, or social media that you would like to share so that people can connect with you later on? I sure would appreciate it.
One of the things I will tell you that our church on second and fourth Tuesdays, we do racial and social justice forums. We started doing this last September, and people are kind of dying off and not coming. And one of the things that I heard someone say in an article, let's not make this a moment, but let's make it a movement. And I can't remember who quoted it. It wasn't I that quoted it, but I found it somewhere. So we're going to continue to do what God has called us to do. At the end of the day, one of the things that I am planning to start, and it's just been on my heart to start, is a grief support group for professionals or for people who are out in the field, because we give a lot to clients, we give a lot to patients, but a lot of times we don't take the time for ourselves to do, that self-care. And that's very important, because I can't fight another day if I'm not putting the oxygen mask on myself first. I'm giving it to everybody else, but I'm not putting it on my face first. And so that's one of the things that I've really been thinking about doing. And I'm actually trying to work with the National Association of Social Workers, the Maryland chapter, to see how we can collaborate to get this going, because I actually did a training for them. They had a conference the end of March. And one of the things that I noticed, and I can feel the vibe, I can feel, the tension, even though it's virtually, that people need an outlet. They need a place to dump how they feel, because they're serving. And when we think about vicarious trauma, we're sitting and we're hearing other people suffering, and we're feeling the hurt that they're going through. And so we don't have those outlets to take care of ourselves. So I will let you know when we get it started. It's not going to be for clients, because we give what we need to give to clients, and their therapists that's doing that. We need it for ourselves. So I'll definitely let you know about that. And when other things come up, I will keep you in the loop.
I love that. Vanessa, tell us about where we can find Pursuing Hope.
Pursuing Hope, the story of Justin Hannah, can be found on our website, which is VaretteMinistry.com. And it's also available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and it's available in a Kindle version as well.
Yes. You all go out and get this book. Support. Go. You were going to say something else.
I was just going to say that we also, my husband and I, co-host a podcast called The Struggle is Real in Grief. Yes. The Struggle is Real in Grief is found on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, basically anywhere you listen to podcasts.
You guys got to follow them. They are, first of all, you all are a cute couple. They're very sweet together. And next time you come, Lisa, you're gonna have to bring your soulmate on so we can see him too. I guess it's something special when you're going through these ministries together, pouring
Yes.
into each other and into the people around you. Thank you so much for joining us. And to everyone, I say continue to share, share everything that we're doing at Message Magazine here on Facebook or on YouTube. Share this with someone else that you know who's going through a moment right now on their journey, and they're struggling with some things. Share Message Magazine. Go to messagemagazine.com, and where you can subscribe both digitally and in print. I got a letter this week from a man who is incarcerated who said, I moved from one facility to the next. They don't have Message Magazine at this place. And truly, people are not going in and out of the prisons with the old-fashioned prison bans right now. And our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated could use a good word like we had today. Please share a message with the people that you know. Coming up May, June, we have a whole issue dedicated to the things that we got to work on, sort of the things, the toxic expressions of faith. It's not rooted in the Bible, but rooted in the kind of ideas that people have because it's growing out of self-interest. But I guess it's time to call those things the way it's supposed to be and try to shake them off. So you need to catch the latest issue, May, June of Message Magazine. Anyway, by next week, I believe and I declare that Claudia Allen will be back in her seat. We're praying her up. You all pray and hit her up online, Claudia Marion Allen, and let her know you're praying for her and thinking about her. Thank you so much for joining us on What's the Message. We'll see you next week.